What's going on, guys? Wes here. Today we're going to be installing a PolarStar Jack into a VFC body. If you guys are just here to put the jack inside of the gearbox, go ahead and skip to the timestamp listed in the description below. Otherwise, let's get started from the beginning. Grab yourself a pin punch or a screwdriver or something along those lines. Just you want to punch out your front pin. And go ahead and pull your upper receiver off. With VFC, sometimes you have to pop the charging handle back a little bit and give it a wiggle or two, and then that'll come off. Now this can be set to the side. You won't need to touch that for a while. Moving to the back, you're going to go ahead and pop open your stock. From here, I like to just leave the stock on. It just saves a little bit of time. You're going to go ahead and pull your wire off to the side. And if you look down into your buffer tube, you're going to see that there's a Phillips head screw down there. Now I have to kind of do this off camera because it's on my lap. But you just take your long Phillips head screwdriver, feel around at the bottom of the buffer tube, or if you have a flashlight, which I do not, try to just locate that screw. All right, so now that your screwdriver is now locked into that screw, you're gonna want to go ahead and loosen that all the way until you hear it kind of clicking. That means that the threads are completely out. Flip it over, shake it, go back and forth. It helps move everything around until it falls out. Then from there, you're going to want to go ahead and pull your buffer tube and stock off, and that can be set to the side. So something I like to do is just keep these together. That way you don't lose them or confuse them with anything, and set those off to the side. Next thing is your sling plate. This guy will come off, and you're not going to need that. Down here, you're going to have two 2mm Allen keys. So you're going to want to go ahead and grab your desired tool for that and take those out. And this guy will come off with the spring tension of the motor. I like to just set these down flat so the screws stay in there. That way you don't lose them, and you can set that to the side. Now your motor needs to come out. You have two motor tabs which are on there. Sometimes the negative one is a little difficult to get with your bare hands. If you take your 2mm, you can kind of just pry it off gently, and there you go. Now your motor will follow. The Avalon motors are actually very nice and torquey, so if you have another AEG build, these are really nice motors. Or pawn them off to your friend for more money than they're worth and be a profitable person. So at the bottom of your grip, you have two more Phillips head screws. They are hard to see on camera, unfortunately, but they're very easy to see with your very own eyes if you're doing this yourself. So with a magnetized screwdriver, sometimes these will come out. If they do, set them to the side. I like when they stay inside the grip. It actually makes reinstallation a lot easier, but I guess the VFCs want to come out. So once those two screws are out, you can give a few little wiggles on your grip. Make sure your wires are loose. Kind of twist it, and they'll find their way out. Keep those all together. That way you don't confuse them with anything else. And you can set those off to the side. So now that you took your grip off, you're going to want to go ahead and take off your bolt catch, because if you don't remove the bolt catch, you don't have room to remove your mag release. So from here, you're going to want to take, like, your 2mm will work, or if you have a very thin pin punch, and push out this pin towards the back of the receiver, because it has an O-ring, and if you try to push it forward, it'll ruin the O-ring, and then that pin will fall out. So now you're going to wonder why this isn't coming out. Now if you go to the other side of the gearbox, there's this little lever right here, and you're going to want to push down on that with your finger, then take this and wiggle it around, and it'll come out. You can see how it has this little bar on it. That actually locks in to the little piece we pushed down on the other side. So go ahead and now set the bolt catch to the side. So over here, you're going to want to take your finger, or if you want to use like a screwdriver or something to push, you can. But this comes out like a real mag release, so there are no screws or anything. So you're going to want to push on the mag release button really hard and pull outward on this side and twist to the left. And you're going to want to try to give it enough pressure so it doesn't scratch your body. So now that this is completely unscrewed, you come back over and you kind of want to, there's a lot of spring tension on this button, so you want to be careful when you're wiggling it around. You can even take your 2mm and put it into the opening That way, if it does shoot anywhere, it shoots right onto your tool. All right, and then from here, I like to set the spring onto the mag release bar and tighten the button on. That way, nothing gets lost. Cool, so now that those are off, you're gonna wanna work our way to the selectors, which I believe are a 2.5. Let's see if I'm correct. They are. I always work on the secondary selector first. You're going to want to hold on to this while you unscrew it because it'll want to twist if you don't. And then you'll see that it has a loose floating screw. So go ahead and just make sure that doesn't fall out. Now on the other side, it's going to be the exact same thing, except there is a spring and a little ball bearing. Do not lose that little ball bearing. So be careful when you take it out because sometimes it stays on the selector and sometimes it doesn't and it sits on the body. So set this upside down in a place where you're not going to bump it because you don't want to lose that little ball bearing. So now that you have both of your selectors off, you're going to want to look at your floor pin and confirm where the grooves are. If they're on this side, you want to punch it that way out, and if they're on the other side, you want to punch it that direction because it's larger in diameter and it won't actually go through the entire length of the receiver and the gearbox, and you're going to have a bad day trying to get that out. Elevate the gearbox a little bit. That way, you know, if it's flat on the table and you try to punch a pin out, it's not going to go anywhere because it's going to go right into the table. Cool. So once it comes free, they come out pretty easily, but there's your little floor pin. And add to the pile of parts that we need to install later. So from here, now we can elevate the receiver again and pop out that rear body pin. Now VFCs don't come out all the way, they actually will stay in there. Now when you remove this, I suggest you take the hand not holding the body and put it on the back here, and you're gonna feel gears. You just wanna put your hand back there. That way, if you're not working on a organized workplace, you don't lose anything. But this gear tends to fall off, and it is very crucial. All right, so from there you can see this one just flew off, but there is a gear with a bar through it, and these need to come off next. They either will come off on their own like this set, or sometimes you need to take a little flathead and pry off that one there. But the one attached to the actual selector plate stays, you're perfectly fine. All right, so flipping the gearbox back over, you're gonna see you have that little bolt catch piece. This is that piece we depress to release the bolt catch. From here, you're gonna need a very, very small Phillips head screwdriver, and you're gonna wanna just press down kind of hard because you don't wanna strip it. Now, if you strip it, it's not really crucial because it's just your bolt catch, and it's not really, it has absolutely no real purpose for the gun's functionality. So you also have this little securing tab. I don't even know what to call these little things. And then just keep all these together because you're gonna reuse them. And I like to keep parts that go together. And you can set all that stuff to the side. So since this is an Avalon, you have a quick change spring. So if you are to use your thumb or whatever size Allen key that is, just go ahead and remove that because you're going to reuse it to reapply your buffer tube. Now there's a lot of grease on these parts because it's a VFC and they use an excessive amount of mustard to lubricate their guns. So now that you have absolutely no spring tension on the gearbox, taking apart the gearbox is a breeze. You can go ahead using your Phillips head screwdriver and start removing all the screws around the gearbox shell. Awesome, so now that you have all the screws removed from your gearbox, you can lift up on the top half of that shell. Now for some reason this gear wanted to stay on this half, but since we're not using any of those parts again, it is not a problem. So now you can remove all the unnecessary parts. The only parts that you're going to be reusing are the trigger spring, and the small screw that holds the trigger contacts in place. You can remove everything else. So remove those trigger contact screw, or the spring. Grab your trigger And the trigger spring, set that to the side. Release the screw that holds the trigger contacts in, and you can set that with the trigger because those are going to be reused. Grab your anti-reversal latch out of there. You can actually remove your trigger contacts beforehand. Makes a little more room in there. Set all that stuff to the side. Now that you have everything stripped from your gearbox shells, you can take this time to kind of clean it up. And you're going to be installing an HPA unit, you might as well keep it pretty. Something I do when I install HPA units is modify the selector plate. What I do is essentially where the selector plate engages the selector button on the unit. If you flip over your trigger board, you'll see a little brown like switch, and that engages the selector plate. The selector plates sometimes are very they're a 90 degree essentially, so they will hit the selector bar on your unit and it can cause it to break. And I've had that happen, so what I do is I just sand a 45 degree angle into the selector plate, and this picture will show you what I mean. And it just kind of ramps it when it selects the selector mode. Anyway, now that you have everything cleaned up and you can kind of make way, we can crack open our jack or whatever unit you're installing. This is if you're installing an F2 or really any drop-in unit, this video will be very useful. And you can take your hose and thread it into the back of the PolarStar Jack. Now either use a little pair of needle nose, or if you bought an amp-dyed gel or something, that tool will work as well. So just make sure it's snug, but it doesn't need to be like ridiculously tight. So now you can grab your jack unit and set it right there. From here you can take your wire harness, and this will plug into the only port on the trigger board that's large enough to accommodate it. So now that that's in, the port you're going to be using is the J2 port. It is the top port for the PolarStar Jack. The boards are now universal between the Jacks and the F2s. That's why they use the extended trigger board. So now the trigger board will go right back where your trigger contacts once were, and you're going to grab that screw that was holding in your trigger contacts, and there is an opening right behind the button where the trigger engages to fire the unit. And you want to make sure that's snug. Really, I just get it tight enough to the point where if I grab or try to move the trigger board, it does not move. Because it's a trigger board, it's, not super sturdy. I mean, it's very solid. It's just like, you don't need to crank it down. So from here, you're going to try to run these wires out the way they used to go. Sometimes if you bend it kind of sharply, it'll flatten the wires out and allow you to run them in tight places. This is going to be the tightest spot right here around this bend. But it should fit. I don't see why it wouldn't. With these new wire harnesses, you could even grab your punch or something and kind of force that down in there. Because you don't want it pinching the two pieces of gearbox shell when you go to put it back together. So from here, let's go ahead and grab our trigger and place that back in place. All right, cool. So luckily that stays in place without me needing to hold it. Now from here, you're going to want to make sure that the holes right here line up and the jack is locked into place. I'm going to run this wire out the main opening at the bottom of the gearbox shell. Take your upper half of the gearbox, and line everything up. And it should seal very nicely. Make sure the trigger moves. That's just kind of something I check. And from here, you can grab a rounded head screw. The flathead ones go here. And I think that's it. I think there's only one. Yeah, there is. So the flattened one goes up there. So just go ahead and tighten the middle one, kind of is a good point to start at. Then grab another rounded one and move to the rear of the gearbox shell. Woo. Don't drop your screwdriver on yourself. And then tighten that one up. Now you can let go because there's pressure applied on both sides. And then from here, it doesn't really matter the order. I just like to do the front and the back, or the middle and the rear, because it just makes the most sense to me. Now you can grab your flat screw and thread that one in the very, very front. If you don't do this, the gearbox won't actually fit back into the lower receiver. So get your screws all tightened up. And while you're here, you might as well reinstall your bolt catch, because I often forget about it and it's frustrating. If it was my personal gun, I wouldn't care, because it's a feature that is kind of not really necessary to me. But to a customer's gun, you want to make sure that it retains the functionality. So let's grab our little screwdriver again and make sure that's tight, and then just make sure this functions. Honestly, you don't have to reinstall that little disc locker thing. It'll function perfectly fine without it. So now you want to flip your gearbox shell back over, and this often falls out from the selector. You want to kind of work the selector plate, you want to kind of work this gear back in. I honestly am not a fan of the Avalon selector system. I think it's completely overcomplicated and ridiculous, but that is complete personal preference, and I feel like a lot of people might argue with that. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of things Crytag does, but personally I think their selector setup is top tier. You need to reuse your spring guide. The only thing is, this is a quick change spring guide, so it relies on spring tension. So when reinstalling, I like to use the screw as a way of maneuvering it. So when you put it in, you want to pull back on it and lock it in place, because if you don't, your buffer tube won't reinstall. So now you can go ahead and reinstall that gear with the bar through it, and put your selector plate gear parallel with the gearbox shell and in safety. It's a good point of reference, and it makes installation a lot easier. So flipping back over, you're going to install the other gear. It is a moon shape, so it can only go on in one direction. Then you're going to take that other gear, and the notch on this gear has a little hole it falls into. And you want to make sure that that notch and this opening here are parallel with each other. It's super overcomplicated, and I actually don't like this system because it just leaves a lot of room for error, and you have to constantly apply pressure to it, because if you're off one tooth, your selector gear will be wrong. Okay, so now that you have tension on both and you're clamping it like this, you can finally take your lower receiver, feed your wire through there and your hose through the bottom, and while you're still applying pressure to those gears, you want to drop it in and just be careful that they don't fall out, because you're going to want to cry and you're going to have to redo it, and it just sucks. So I just put the rear pin in right away just so everything stays nice and tight, and I just like to confirm that I put this secondary one on correctly. Yes, okay. So now you can put your floor pin back in. Just tap that back into place and confirm that your spring guide is still in place. Now I like to jump right to putting your buffer tube back on, because the chances of this falling out are very, very high. So just go ahead and try not to move a lot of things around. When reinstalling, I actually like to take the stock off. It's kind of stupid. I probably should have done it right at the beginning, but you can do this or you can't. It's completely up to you. Now, when trying to take off the stock from the buffer tube, there's a pin that you want to pop out right here. Now, it's totally unnecessary because if you pull it all the way, it slides right off. So you can honestly just leave it off, and what that'll do is allow you to just take your stock off at any point in time. You just have to remember that or you'll rip your wires out. When reinstalling, this can be a blessing and a curse. Sometimes it goes very, very smoothly, and sometimes you drop everything. But I take my screwdriver and I apply pressure to the side. Oh, it fell out, see? So let's take this and apply sideward pressure so we don't lose it on there. Did that work? I will be very surprised. That is always a reassuring feeling when that tightens. Perfection. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and install our selectors because they are some of the more annoying part of this install. So you're going to want to take that little ball bearing and set it in the auto opening, and then set this down back into its home. And you have to constantly apply pressure because there's a spring where that ball bearing rests and it presses upward. So now just to confirm that this safety, oh thank God it works. Those selectors have given me a lot of struggle when I was first learning these guns, and they stress me out because I've spent a lot of time on those selectors to get them to work correctly. So from here, we can take our grip and our screws that we took out earlier. Woo. Now if you have a magnetic screwdriver, this will help quite a bit. And thread those back into the holes that they came out of. All right, so now you want to go ahead and throw your mag release back in because you have to put that in before you put your bolt catch back on because there is no space. So that will drop into place like that. Flip your gun over while still applying pressure to the back of the mag release. Drop your spring in. You can set this on there and get not even a full turn, and then you have to press that really, really hard again and get it going over here and continue to pull upward to get over some of the things, and then you come back over here. Now we still see silver in there. You have like one more turn, and that last turn is always the most difficult one, and it sucks, but it's a very good mag release design, and it's very, very solid as you could hear, but just confirm that everything is working properly. Now for reinstalling your bolt catch, you're going to want to look inside of your mag well right here and press down, I can't get my hair in the way, press down on your bolt catch again right here. And when you look in there, you're going to see there's a way it locks in place. I don't think you can see that, unfortunately. But when you look in your mag release or your mag well while you press down on that silver lever, you'll see it move, and you'll see the bar come across the gearbox shell. And when you push down on the silver piece, it will allow the bolt catch to move even further across and lock into place. It's very, very simple. It's just you have to kind of know what to look for. So apply that pin back in, make sure that the O-ring is facing the back of the gearbox shell, and push it in and confirm that this moves, which it does. Yippee-ki-yay. Now you can go ahead, pop that pin back out, take your upper receiver, slide it on. Sometimes you have to, like I said earlier, wiggle these or set the upper down and push really hard. But they're really nice bodies, and that's why they fit so well. Then from here, go ahead and take your stock, the power of editing, slide that back on, take that pin you just had and reinstall it. It's actually very, very, very light, like so. And these tubes are labeled left and right, so I actually don't ever check that. I just see if they fit or not and go from there. But they only go on one way, so put these little boyos back on there. Make sure that's in shot. plug that up to the only one it's going to plug into, like so. You can fold it over once, shove that in there. You have plenty of space for batteries with the QRS stock. It's actually very, very nice. Close that up, and you have now successfully installed a PolarStar Jack into your VFC Avalon series. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any, questions or anything like that, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. We are very, very happy to help you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.